Good morning, everybody. It's Rebecca Jennings here. I am Senior Client Advisor here at Global Reviews. Thank you for dialing in this morning. What we're going to talk about this morning is some of the insight from our recent motor insurance fruition research that take place every 6 months in the UK, Ireland, and Australia. I'm going to talk you very briefly through the methodology of that research, and then I'm going to talk about some of the key insights from it this morning, just really around the quote process and some of the insights we've taken from improving the experience around specifically getting a quote and completing the quote process. Obviously, the presentation will be available to you afterwards, as will the recording. Also, for those of you dialed in at the moment, you might notice on the right hand side on your panel there's an option of handouts. Under that is a industry report that was recently completed on motor insurance in the UK, which is free for you to download, so please do that this morning. And as I say, we can send that to you later as well if that is more convenient. So my name is Rebecca Jennings, and as I say, what we're going to talk about today for the next half hour or so is a study we call Fruition. This is research that took place both across the desktop and mobile devices in the UK and Ireland towards the end of 2017. I'll talk a little about the methodology in a moment. It's research that we conduct every 6 months. So it's looking at the experience that consumers have in looking for motor insurance, getting a quote, going through the buy process across a number of sites in the UK and in this particular case, Ireland. Very quickly, I'm sure most of you on the line or listening today know of Global Reviews, have come across us at some point, but just very quickly, we are a leading research insights and analytics company. We work across UK, Europe, North America and Australia. We've been running for around 18 years, offices primarily in London and Melbourne and Cork in Ireland. Primarily, we are focused on helping you identify the issues that 95% of your customers will experience when they try to interact with you online. Look for product information, compare it and buy it, and how you can reduce those issues, how you can get rid of them, and also identifying your lost opportunity. Why don't your top prospects actually end up buying from you? Who are they? And what is going wrong in the research and buy process that makes them leave? That insight and research is conducted across many industries, across the territories in which we work in. You can see some of the brands that are involved here. We're obviously talking about motor insurance today, but we also look at home insurance, we look at travel, many types of financial services, so current accounts, mortgages, savings, energy, and credit cards. So a wide variety of industries involved here. So what that means is, while we obviously look at your industry in depth when we do the research, there's an awful lot of experience and examples that can come from other industries, and you'll see some of that as we go through the webinar this morning. It may well be that the best examples of, say, a checkout process are not within your own industry, they are within another industry. Often energy, for example, often provides us with some good examples of how to do checkouts and buy processes and comparing products. So you've got the benefit not only of the research that we have on your industry, but also the experience across multiple industries, across many years of insight. So very quickly, the methodology here. Again, I'm not going to get into this in too much depth. If you're interested, please do follow up with myself or Matthew Armstrong afterwards. But quickly, just so you know where the insight and the data is coming from this. This is a product called Fruition. This looks at both the discover, consider and act phases of the journey of people looking for motor insurance. So the consumers that go through this are recruited in market. They are currently looking for, or recently intend to look for motor insurance. They are in their own homes, on their own technology. We have a group of consumers doing on desktop and a group on mobile, but as I say, they're in their own homes, on their own technology, mimicking the actual environment they would be in when they did this. So the first stage is a blank screen study where they go off and look for a provider to give them motor insurance to suit their needs. We can see everything they do. We download an applet onto their computers, on their tablets and their phones, so we can see everything they do. So I can see where they go, what they do, what search terms they use. We ask a number of questions about that process. Who would they originally prefer? Who would they prefer and put on a short list to investigate further? Who would they finally choose, and why? And why don't they choose particular brands? So from that stage, we can see the discover phase, how people find brands and they make decisions on which brands to investigate further and which to go with. Then we go through into the consider and act phases, which is where a group of these consumers, a different group for each brand, a group are put on, directed toward a specific brand in this industry. There's normally around 8 in this benchmarking process. And we say, please go to this particular site, go to Churchill, go to Admiral, and do a number of specific things. We ask them to actually undertake some tasks on that site, find the range, get a quote, find a product that matches particular needs. And again, we can see everything they do, and we ask them some questions as they go along in terms of how they find the process, what the problems they discovered were, what would they do in a real life situation, would they look for help, would they just abandon. So we have a whole range of insight from consumers about what they say and do across the process. Supplemented with that is the best practice features and functions audit we internally conduct. Around 150, 200 yes-no questions across that journey, looking at discovering, does the site meet the best practice guidelines for this type of interaction? So what we've got here, and what we're going to concentrate more on today, is that insight from both the consumers and the best practice audit at every step across the journey they're having on your website. And we're not looking just at your website. They say this is a benchmarking process. So in each of the studies we conduct, in every territory, there is usually around 8 to 10 brands in that study. So we can give you detailed insight into your own brand, but also your competitors. As I say, we conduct this in the UK and Ireland. It's also conducted as it happens in Australia, but the research this morning is more about the UK and the Irish studies conducted towards the end of Q4 17. 200 in-market consumers do it on desktop, 150 on mobile, same numbers in Ireland. Say they are doing a number of tasks, finding products to suit their needs across these benchmarked sites. And the sample is recruited from a mixture of third-party panel providers, experts in this, doing this. We don't run our own panel. That's an expensive way to lose a lot of money. So we take our sample, we recruit from a range of third-party panel providers, depending on who's the best in the market at doing what we want to do at that time, mobile, desktop, which industry we're looking at. The key insight from what we're talking about here is obviously an awful lot of data. There's an awful lot of data behind this that we take and use to figure out what the pain points are. I'm going to show you a little bit of that today. There is about 500 data points in each of these studies, so I'm not going to show you all of that. It's not death by PowerPoint nor death by Excel. But really, I just wanted to show you the kind of top line insight that we get across each brand in each industry, and the steps in the journey that the research looks at. So this is essentially the data that comes out of that journey that consumers do going across each of these websites. So it's a different set of consumers across each different site. And it's a mix, this data, of what consumers say and do, but also that best practice audit. So we have data and insight across the initial engagement phase, coming into the website, does it meet my needs? Do I think it looks interesting? Then going into the quote process, can I find the products I want? Can I get a quote? What do I think of that quote process? Does the quote process then provide me with information that matches my needs? Can I compare the information? Why would I buy from you? And then actually going through the complete the process stage. Should I do it online? Why would I do it with you? Is it easy? Is it safe? Is it secure? Through to actual purchase. As I say, this is the data that we have on all the brands in this market, and then obviously there is another step of further down data. This is rolled up at each stage. So there's about 500 data points that go on into this. What I've just shown you here is the average for mobile and desktop in the UK and Ireland. it's quite often interesting to look at it like this. Obviously, this doesn't reveal at the moment who does best and who does worst. We'll show you some of that in a moment. But what this reveals is there's usually industry pain. There's usually an area where most brands in a market do badly. And conversely, there are usually areas where most brands do reasonably well. And you can see here that's this is no exception. We have a sort of bump around, for example, why choose this company. Most brands in this market are doing reasonably well at why would I choose you? What's good about this particular brand? So we see that as we go through. So really, that was just to show you the kind of in-depth data that we have as we go through this research. Specifically, obviously, we have it on each of the brands in the benchmark, so we can see who's doing well, who's doing badly at each step, and who can improve that process in terms of helping consumers get through this journey as quickly and easy as possible. They're not enjoying this. It's not something they do for fun. They want to save money, but they want to do it quickly and easily and get it done and worry about something else. I quite like this idea here. Obviously, no, we don't want a situation where every site ends up looking like everybody else. But still, we have to remember that for the vast majority of sites, you can't invent something. You can't invent an interaction process by yourself. Users spend most of their time on other sites. They would prefer your site to work the way that the other sites they already know do. They don't want you reinventing the wheel to be different. They want it to work. They want it to work smoothly. They want it to work every time. And they want it to look familiar. And that is often, when you come to interaction processes, the key to remembering how should we do this. Okay, let's look at what else works out there already. Let's not try and reinvent this wheel. So let's look at some of the key pains when we come to that quote and buy process particularly. As I say, there is data across each of these steps. We have half an hour this morning, so we're going to look, as I say, briefly at some of this quote and buy process and what is going on here and how this can be improved. I talked about data earlier. I said there were hundreds of data points in here. This, you'll be probably pleased to know, is one of the few graphs I'm actually going to show you that is full of data. Data is great. Data is obviously the underlying insight source of what's going on here, but obviously it doesn't tell you on its own an awful lot. What we need to look at is why people are saying what they're saying, why the scores are what they are, and what you can do about it, because in some cases there's going to be very little you can do about things. There are some things you legally have to do. There's often issues with small print. Consumers don't like it, but often it's got to be there. So the data is interesting. What I think is interesting here is that while most of the brands across the UK and Ireland here are scoring pretty well in terms of the functionality of the tool, the actual tick boxes of what it's got and what it can do, when it comes to the user evaluations, it's a different story. In many cases, user evaluation of the quote process are poor. They feel that it's not a good process. They're not satisfied with what's going on as they go through the experience. So while it might tick the practical yes/no boxes in many cases, the actual usability and the way it feels and the way it hangs together for consumers is not doing what consumers feel it needs to do. And that has knock-on effects, obviously. This is a selection of those brands you've just seen. Again, we have this for all of those, but that makes for a very unpleasant graph. So this is those, just a selection of brands from this to show. Let's have a think about what the impact of that journey is. So this is saying to consumers, essentially, what did you feel in terms of effort that the quote, you've just gone through the quote process, in terms of how much effort you had to do that. Was it a lot more than you expected, a lot less, or around what you expected? And as you can see here, for many of the brands that I've got here, it's actually more than expected, slightly or indeed far more. For example, for Direct Line, for Swift Cover, actually a third or nearly a third of our users are saying it's actually far more effort than I expected. They managed to do it. All of these quote processes work. There's a slight exception in terms of Swift Cover because it's not mobile optimized, but ignoring them. the processes in all of these cases work. You can go through them, you can get a quote, you can buy. They're not broken. They're just more effort than people would like to put in to do this. Hastings Direct, you've got over half of consumers here saying actually that was slightly more than I expected, or far more than I expected. So as I say, these forms they're ticking the boxes in terms of you can do what you need to do. They have the key building blocks, but actually they're just making it more effort than consumers want to make at this point. So specifically, what's going on here? Well, actually, it does vary, obviously, as you would expect across the mobile and the desktop. People are in different mindsets when they are doing them across the different devices. Key takeaways or key problems that people say to us are around, certainly on the mobile, I found the quote process longer than I would expect. A third of consumers saying that when we're talking about a mobile process. In both cases, across the desktop and mobile, around a quarter of consumers are saying it required more questions than I expected. So again, it's sort of the same problem. It feels long, there are more things to do, more things to ask. A considerable amount of consumers found it confusing. And again, that is partly to do with a lot of questions and how do I interact, how do I answer this question, what do I have to do? So some really key issues coming out here in terms of feeling long, more questions, and just a confusing process. I didn't know what I was expected to do. I didn't know how long it was going to take. I didn't know what I was letting myself in for, essentially. So some of the key things that come out of that is really important in terms of this process, again, particularly on mobile. Firstly, it's about setting expectations. We're going to talk about each of these in a moment. Tell people what they're in for, essentially, and do that all the way through the process as they're going through the process. Keep them informed. Reduce the cognitive load. That's sort of a slightly fancy way possibly of saying minimize the complex interactions that they have to make, minimize the decisions they have to make, minimize the amount of things they have to remember through the process. If you show them something on the first screen that it's important that they know, keep showing it. And we'll show some examples about that in a minute. It's simple things like steps, for example, labeling steps that make them think about what they're doing. And ensuring reassurance on privacy and security is sort of the final thing here, keeping people reassured that, yes, you're giving us a lot of information, but it's going to be safe, it's going to be secure. You're not going to get a lot of spam because you're doing this. There are good reasons you are giving us all this information. That's key. Don't ask for things that people immediately look at and go, well, why am I giving you that? Why do you need the expiry date of my home insurance if I'm applying for car insurance? Things like that. So let's have a quick look at each of those. So setting expectations, and this is really around that idea that I don't know what's going on here. I don't know how long it's going to take. I don't know what you need. Am I actually going to be able to get the insurance? If people don't feel confident about all of that, when they first start a process that looks long, a certain percentage of them will just go, okay, well, I can't do this now. It looks really long. I don't know what I'm going to need. Am I actually going to be sure at the end of it? This is not worth my while. It's too hard. It's too complicated. I'm not going to do it. So this is just about making sure quickly at the beginning of the process, people know how long it's going to take. They don't need to know exactly, but they need to know, can they do it now? Have they got, I've got 10 minutes with a cup of tea, I can do it. Or do I need to go home, sit down, make sure the baby's asleep, take 20 minutes. How long is it going to take? Where is the help if I need it? I'm not necessarily going to need it, and hopefully I won't. But a consumer needs to know they can find it quickly and easy if they need it. Am I going to be covered immediately? Am I going to be covered tomorrow? Is it going to take some time? I want to go out now. I've got a problem. Can I cover myself immediately? And what will I need? Do I need my driving license number? Tell me if I need that kind of thing. I need my no claims history. Okay, you just need to tell me about these things. What do I need from anybody else that I'm going to share with me? So just setting those things, again, it doesn't need to be a whole page of big text. We've got a couple of examples here from Altitude and Amex, an Amex credit card application form. Probably a little bit more information you'd need to show, but the principle saying who can apply, how is it going to work, what happens. Similarly with Capital One, here's the criteria you should meet, credit history, below the limit on your cards, and you've paid your bills. So just ticking the boxes that just says, this is what you need to know before you start this process. Setting expectations right from the start. And then once users are in the process, keep it simple. This is the idea about reducing this cognitive load. Don't hit consumers with a whole lot of information all at once that they've got to keep in their heads, or they feel they've got to keep in their heads. So thinking about a single column design, even on desktop where you've got the space, thinking about focus on a single column design, let people worry about one question at a time. Require minimal effort. We're going to talk about drop buttons and drop downs and radio buttons again in a minute, but anything that reduces the effort that consumers are going to have to make to make an input is going to help. So radio buttons, again, rather than drop downs, quick clicks, again, even on the desktop. Size the form fields so users know what you're expecting. There's good examples here in terms of date of birth on LV, for example. DD, it's sized as to what the input box is expecting. Consumers aren't confused. It's very clear here, for example, that the year needs to be 4 digits rather than 2. That's a typical thing where people get confused. Do I just need to put in 01 or do I put in 2001? Very clear here what the input box is expecting. Avoid clear field buttons. In fact, I thought that was so important, I put that twice. So people do not want a button that says clear field at the bottom of the page. That annoys people. They hit it by mistake. If they wanted to clear and start again, they just start again. They just refresh and start again. So no clear field buttons. Again, this gives them something else to worry about. We're reducing this cognitive load. Remember, we're taking away stuff that they don't really need. And similarly, avoid unnecessary placeholder text. There's no need to put in a name box John Smith in shaded text to tell people what they're going to do, what they need to do. They know they're putting their name in that box. Sometimes it's helpful, very occasionally it's helpful. Let's say you've seen here with the date of birth, quite helpful to put in the year, the 4 Ys, again, just to reinforce the fact that this is a 4-digit number we're expecting here. So occasionally it's helpful. In the vast majority of occasions, shaded text to show people what you're expecting just isn't necessary. And it just confuses people. It makes them think they've filled in a box but they haven't. They get to the end, they press go, and they realise, oh, that what I glanced at from the corner of my eye there is not a box I filled in. It's your predictive, your text, and it just annoys. Stop annoying people, really, and that's what we're trying to do here. Often we've got to the stage now where a lot of these processes, I say they work. You can do it. You can do what you want to do, but it's death by 1,000 cuts that kills people. They get annoyed, 3 or 4 annoyances in, they're like, actually, no, this is too much effort. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm too annoyed now. I'm going to go and do this. I'm going to have a cup of tea, come back and do it with somebody else. You've just annoyed me too much. So reducing that cognitive load. Don't make people think too hard. And then particularly when we're talking about the mobile, we've got some specific issues when we come to forms on mobile, of course. We are all got to the stage now pretty much where obviously we're using the mobile devices to do this kind of thing now. Most of us use 1 digit in order to do that. Most of us don't use two fingers on our phones, and actually around half of us just use a thumb. So you've really got to think about the size of your interaction elements. So a thumb can hit them safely and securely without hitting 3 things at once, hitting 2 mileage numbers. It's very important to start scaling up, in many cases, those input options to make sure that people aren't clicking by something by mistake. Because again, that's annoying. I've got to go back and do it again now. I don't know what to do. I'm going to go and do something else somewhere else. And say that form factor. Now that kicks in when you talk about what kind of interaction elements you need within your form, both in terms of speedy usability, but also in that size form factor with the thumb. Generally speaking, studies show that conversion rates of forms with drop-down fields can be reduced anything up to 10%. Multiple drop-down fields increase that drop-down of conversion. Drop-downs are, again, annoying. They're really easy to click the wrong thing, particularly on mobile. So anything you can do to offer alternative options instead of that drop-down, and we'll talk about that again in a moment, is going to improve your conversions. Radio buttons, these sort of circle boxes or the boxes, very useful when you've only got options that are mutually exclusive. So am I male, female, Am I the registered keeper of the car? Do I have any offences? These are all yes, no questions. There's no maybe, possibly, a little bit. I'll answer 2 of these. Yes, no. Radio buttons, boxes work very effectively there. Check boxes work well when users may select multiple options, because again, it just reinforces that I have clicked this. You can use a standalone checkbox sometimes where users want to turn an option on and off. So do you want to be contacted by email? Do you want to be contacted by telephone? But again, these are good ways of giving an instant visual feedback that you've done something as a consumer. And again, back to that point I made earlier about the Jacob Nielsen quote, this is how people expect things to work. This is how other people do things. This is the visual feedback they expect when they make those decisions, when they make a yes/no decision, when they make multiple choice decisions. Drop downs again, I say drop downs, generally speaking, reduce your conversion. Sometimes it's hard to think of another way of doing things when you've got a long list of things that people can choose from. It is hard to think about other ways of doing things, but sometimes there are alternative options. So you might think typing. Typing works better, say with dates, particularly things like cover start dates or birthdays. These are things people can type really quickly and easy. You can type a date very quickly, particularly say things like birthdays. So in many cases, having dates drop downs or rollovers is actually making consumers make too much effort. It's just quicker to help them get them to type the date. Autocomplete is often a good way of getting around this idea that there are 25 or 30 or 40 options I could use here, like putting in the make of my car. If the list can be filtered effectively, if it works that I can type in the 2 or 3 numbers or letters and then come up with a short list of options, autocomplete is a really good way, again, of getting through this idea of a really huge drop down. Again, particularly on mobile, where people have to use a drop down or the roll ups, it's really easy to click the wrong thing and think, oh, and not even realize perhaps get to the bottom of the form and think, actually, no, that's not my car. I didn't realize I clicked the wrong thing there. So thinking about avoiding those drop downs as much as you can. Think about whether typing would work, whether autocomplete would work for that particular list. You are really trying to reduce this problem of buttons and links being too close together, because consumers mistakenly pressing something they didn't intend to do, and often, as I say, not even realizing they've done it. So the other issue around this buttons and links too close together is around feedback and labels. So what we've got here in terms of keeping that information and feedback short but relevant, because firstly, people again think it's clickable. It's not, but you've got to give them some feedback. We talked about earlier about the boxes. People expect feedback when they've done something. A nice tick, very clear. Short label text telling me what I'm supposed to be doing here. And again, on mobile, this is particularly important. It's not the case that you need a long list, a long line inviting them to put their phone number in. It's just phone number. Phone number will do. People don't need you to be happy and chatty and conversational at this point of a process. As long as it's clear about what they're doing, that's great. They're just going to get on with it. Icons are great. Icons are really helpful often. They need to be labeled in most cases. There are very few universal icons that really work. Interestingly enough, email and phone number might be a couple of them, but in most cases, icons also need a label, and that goes with steps as well, and we'll talk about that in a minute. When you label the steps at the top of a page, don't just put 1, 2, 3. You need to label them and what they are. Help users understand what they're doing, where they are in a process, and what's going to happen when they click a button. So steps, as I say, we were talking about steps a moment ago. The problem with insurance forms, and you see here mobile application forms, they are long. There is absolutely, well, really nothing you can do about that. You have to ask a certain number of questions. So it's all about reducing that perceived length. So concertinas really help with that, particularly when you've got here, as I say, with EEA, concertinas with great labels about which step is what. I can go back and I can edit them if I suddenly realise I might have done something wrong. So the perceived length of the form is reduced and the labels are really clear. Again, with the Hastings example, again, as many questions as everybody else, but progressively revealed so you don't overwhelm consumers right at the beginning. The feeling is not, oh my gosh, that's way, way too long. Similarly with steps, break it down, but make sure those steps are clickable. So again, people can go backwards and forwards and change things or check things. You should really label those steps. The Aviva works because it's progress bars and they can be clicked, so that's fine. It needs to go the next step and actually have a label underneath. So if you suddenly think, oh, I think I may have put the driver's name in incorrectly, or the length of how they'd had a driving license, I can go back to that. I'm not guessing which step it is and go, oh, straight back to step 2, which was drivers. Also, other thing here to note, the hit area of those buttons is big enough to be hit clearly with a thumb. And one of the other things we've got mentioned here was security and privacy, just to wrap up the key points here. We have about 15% of people at all times in everything we do, in every piece of research we do, say, actually, I'm not convinced it's safe and secure. So you've just got to keep hitting those clear clicking those clear things, those form factors that show people this is safe and secure. Header should offer a padlock, a color change, or the word secure. In fact, in a perfect world, all of those things. It would go green, it would have a padlock, it would say secure. Really just little visual reinforcement, this is safe and secure. Pages, forms should have information about security, again in simple language, and privacy. Two sides of the same thing, two sides of something that they're not exactly the same thing. Is my stuff safe? I'm not gonna have my credit card details stolen, but also you're not gonna start spamming me, you're not gonna sell this to somebody else. So be very clear and explicit that it's safe, secure, and we're not going to sell your data. The final thing here I just wanted to talk about quickly before we go is so the next stage of development that we're seeing here in terms of a quote process. The next sort of evolution that we're seeing in some cases is conversational design. So this idea that rather than putting all the questions on one page, you introduce them one at a time in a more conversational manner. And obviously, depending on what people say in one question, determines what they get further down the line. So the logic works to make sure they only see the questions that they need to see. So they don't just get a long list of questions, and some of which are not relevant to them. Because ultimately, when it comes to it, the number of questions and pages is largely immaterial, partly because consumers do know when they're doing an insurance process, they need to answer a certain amount of questions, otherwise they don't believe the quote. So they do know they need to tell you this stuff, but it's about their perception of the ease and accuracy with which they can interact, which really filters down to success. So for example, here we've got two examples of insurance, Amy in Australia and Beagle Street here in the UK, just showing that actually 12 page views in Beagle Street, you're still getting actually 81% confidence, 85% satisfaction, 78% saying they didn't have a problem. It's a long process, but because it's easy and it only requires a small cognitive load on each page, people don't mind. They will go through that process and they will come out at the end going, yeah, that was good, I was happy. So one question per page. Collapsible help, so I know where it is. I don't necessarily need it, but I know where it is, as I was saying earlier. It does do drop downs, but that's not perfect. But it's the hidden functionality makes it looks less like a form. Large icons, again with smaller text, labeled icons, and the quote becomes personalized as I go through the process. So this is a tool by which consumers feel comfortable. They feel they're going through a process simply, but they are still answering all those key questions. So at the end, you get an editable summary of the quote, of the questions that I've answered. So you can see I've still answered quite a number of questions as I've gone through this, and I can edit them from here. But I've quickly got a good quote that I feel reasonably confident in because you've got all the key information. And as we saw earlier, as I say, this is a process that we are increasingly see getting more popular. Frank in Australia offers something very similar, but it's a more streamlined. Beagle Street have gone a further step down and said, actually, that's not enough information for us. We need a little bit more information to actually give you a good quote. But I think you will see an increasing number of brands using this conversational approach. And again, it works very well on a tablet or mobile because the amount of information that people have to see and have to take in on a screen is reduced. They're not having to scroll to see a lot of information to see a big form. It's very simple. And again, a lot of it can be done with radio buttons. It doesn't require a lot of the time extensive drop downs. So, in terms of what we've talked about today, that's been a fairly quick whistle-top tour through some of the insight from the mobile fruition. Quote tools are by necessity complex beasts. I appreciate that. We're never going to be able to strip them down much further because you have to answer the questions in terms of to get a good quote. But there are things that you can do to reduce that load. Setting expectations, eliminating unnecessary questions as far as possible. Thinking about that thumb. Clumsy people using their thumbs, are your boxes big enough to allow for that? Or are you annoying people? Radio buttons, check boxes, again, speedy answering with those big fat thumbs. Drop downs as a last resort. Sometimes they're going to be necessary, but use them as a method of last resort. Concertinas, fold-ups, labelled steps to reduce immediate apparent length of form, but of course you set the expectation at the beginning as well about how long this is going to take. Visual reassurance on progress. You're doing well, you're on this step, you're on step 2 or 3, step 3 or 5. Reassuring on privacy and security throughout, and keeping an eye on that conversational design, which again is something we can talk to you more about. So thank you very much for your time this morning. It's fair to say, but a bit of a whistle-stop tour, half an hour of insight into what fruition is, but also some of the key takeaways from the quote process. I hope that was interesting. If you have any questions, please do let me know. Obviously, there's an awful lot of other data here that you would have access to as a client in terms of workshops. This is something we run, say, twice a year. So there's a lot of data here, both here and historic. We run, let's say, workshops for clients twice a year. And there's obviously additional advisory hours on anything specific. That might be looking at wireframes, but also might be specific research into, say, the quote process or member services, post login, etc. And there's an awful lot of things we can do. Do download the report if you're interested in that from the sidebar, so I can send that to you. I'm rebecca.jennings@globalreviews.com. My commercial director is matthew.armstrong@globalreviews.com, and either of us are very happy to help you with any queries you have. So thank you very much for your attention this morning. I hope it's been helpful and useful. Please do get in touch if you want a copy of the webinar. It's been recorded, or as anything else we can help you with. So thank you very much for your attention this morning. I'm Rebecca Jennings at globalreviews.com. Thank you.